And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. It is time to jump into NWSL storylines. I have five just kind of things that are going to define this season, things I'm most intrigued by, the biggest stories, questions about this season. Number one, it's the offseason moves. So many high profile transactions. My question with this is basically which team comes kind of out on top, which teams' moves actually deliver, which teams end up being disappointed in how this offseason went and don't get what they thought they were from their approach. You've got the current. I talked about this with the power rankings. Dabinia, the other free agents, Hannah Glass, phenomenal roster construction. Does it actually turn them into one of the best teams in the league and a championship favorite? You've got the Emily Fox Carson Pickett deal. Does one team benefit more than that than the other? Can Emily Sonnet add another piece for OL Reign? Diana Ordonez, what does she do as a follow up now that she's in Houston? Lynn Williams and what Gotham have done to turn themselves into a team with an awful lot of talent. Which of these work? Which of these don't? Which one ends up working the best if every team kind of gets what they're hoping out of it? Does one of these moves end up making a huge difference, whether it's a team getting into the playoffs, a team missing the playoffs that were expected to reach it, or is one of these we look back on as kind of the move that put a team over the top and gives them the shield, gives them the championship, something like that? That is one of the things I'm really curious about because you just don't see this many high profile players moving in a league this small. It's part of the unique setup of the NWSL is you only have, so many spots, and it's sort of similar to the WNBA in that regard because obviously they're similar, in terms of the number of teams, that things can change real quickly when a couple players move in the offseason, and we had plenty of movement this time around. Number two, what did the California expansion teams do for an encore? San Diego Wave are contenders at this point. That is what they have earned based on what they did last season. What does that look like now that they're not the new kids on the block? Now that people have tape on them, now that they're not just trying to kind of have a good first season and build a foundation. They're trying to go win things now. It was a roaring success. What do they do to follow it up? And then on the Angel City side of this, the injuries ruined last season. There's no way around it. The question is, how much of an impact did those injuries actually have? If they stay healthy this season, are they significantly better, a little bit better, or about the same? How much of a difference are those players going to make, assuming they stay healthy this time around? Can you rely on Christian Press and Sydney Leroux to carry a team? It was really unfortunate they didn't get to unveil this team the way that it had been designed because of the Press injury and because of everything that happened after that. But they kind of get a redo here. And there's no pressure on them because this is almost a second inaugural season in many ways. Whereas San Diego Wave, there is no, re-inauguration. There is no kind of grace period at this point because of what they did last season. They have graduated from that. So do we get, both of these teams into the playoffs? What does this end up looking like in year two? And then, of course, you also have your two teenage phenoms, Jaden Saul, Alyssa Thompson. How does that kind of all play out? There's just plenty to be interested in both of these teams. Number 3, it very much feels like a clean slate and new eras for the Spirit and Gotham. New coaches, some roster turnover, more for Gotham than for the Spirit. But they are now both in positions with rosters good enough to contend. These were the worst 2 teams in the league last season, for different reasons, I would argue. And they are both in position to be much, much, much better. Will they? There are a lot of, right? New coach. You've had plenty of turmoil at both these clubs off the field. There's been a lot going on. Can they very quickly get back to, in the case of the Spirit, get back to being one of the best teams in the league, and in the case of Gotham, finally deliver a really good season? And not just trying to make the playoffs, but actually establishing themselves as one of the better teams in the league. There's been a lot of nonsense both clubs have had to deal with, these players have had to deal with. This feels like kind of turning the page, trying to start over. Does it actually make anything different? These teams are capable of bouncing back in a big, big way, both of them. Does it actually happen? Number 4, what is the impact of the World Cup? The NWSL did everything it could to not play regular season games during these international windows. That should be acknowledged first. So it's not like you're going to have your World Cup players missing large portions of the regular season. But that doesn't mean the World Cup can be detached from this NWSL season for a number of reasons. First half of the season, you're playing for roster spots, which doesn't necessarily impact the trajectory of the league and the, which teams succeed, because obviously everybody's trying to play well anyway. But from a storyline standpoint, if somebody has a phenomenal start to the season, they're, did that player play themselves onto the World Cup roster? With the U.S. or another country, but specifically the U.S., right? There's been plenty of kind of in and out with the national team, some players on the fringe. Does somebody have a really tough start to the season and it costs them a World Cup spot? Whatever it might be. There's just this added dynamic, just like you saw on the men's side, where, players who, Tim Ream, and you could go, James Madison for England, you can go down the list. Had that tournament been played 6 months sooner, Tim Ream is not on that plane for the U.S. He was one of their best players. This is the opportunity for somebody to go make a name for themselves and try and play themselves onto a roster. So that's interesting in and of itself. Then there are the actual impacts of the tournament. Unfortunately, injuries are part of this. Whether that's players missing the tournament because you don't have a lot of time to rehab, whether that's players coming back injured. Think Gabriel Jesus and Arsenal. Or just the toll that the tournament takes on players. It's a strange situation when you're playing, that many games in such a short period of time. And that is and also, just this idea of this is the priority. So do we see a little bit of load management, potentially more roster or more squad rotation, players not necessarily wanting to risk it in the weeks leading up to the World Cup? There are all kinds of things that go along with this as well. But it just changes the focus and the perspective of the season, and that can't be ignored. Then the other two things I want to bring up here. if we get some kind of shocking early exit, does some team benefit from that? You look at, the core teams that this U.S. women's roster, the U.S. roster is going to come from. If you get them back, a week and a half earlier, and they don't play as many games, not, don't log as many miles, a little bit fresher, does that make a difference? Or if you've got, I'll just, a key player from a different country, whatever it might be. Does the way that this tournament plays out impact anything? And then also, just what does it do to the second half of the season? Do you have players that come back with a lot of confidence? Do you have players that come back, kind of banged up and tired? What does all of that look like? Because it's not exactly the same, but it was this idea on the men's side of and it's a nice parallel to have just gone through this process. And obviously this isn't, the NWSL is used to this. It's not the first time this is happening because of the way the schedule is set up and the way the world, they play through World Cups. So this isn't new, but you did see the impact of some of these things, and then you get back and you don't even really know what to expect. Are the players who sat there without playing fresher, all of that kind of stuff. And the final thing I want to bring up is there are games being played during the World Cup. They're Challenge Cup games. So that's where you're really going to pay a price if you've got a bunch of internationals who are on World Cup duty. Do we see any kind of emerging stars from this Challenge Cup because you don't have your normal starters in there? Is there a team that has success in this competition, at least in part because their roster is more intact? How do teams prioritize it? There's that balance of it as well. So a lot kind of related to the World Cup, obviously, even though it's not like the league is playing its regular season through the tournament. The league did everything it could to minimize the impact. That impact is still there, though. And then fifth, does the focus stay on the field? What is the story of this season? Because last season, the NWSL made plenty of headlines, and almost none of them had to do with anything that actually happened on the soccer field. The closest the league came to that was, players deciding not to play. This league has been through so much. These players have dealt with so much nonsense. I know I've said that multiple times at this point, but it can't be emphasized enough. The coaching changes last season, all of it. This is an attempt to do this differently. And, the leadership. Cindy Parlow-Cone, Jessica Berman, from the top down, trying to get this right, trying to do better by the players. That's not going to change overnight. But there is accountability now. People are not getting away with this abhorrent behavior. So do we get a season now that it is clear the league is taking this as seriously as it can and trying to put steps in place after the Yates report to stop this stuff from ever happening again? Do we get to talk about what's happening on the field? Because the only way we talk about what's happening on the field is if there's not much to talk about it off of it. Of course, there will be stories. There are always stories. And like I said, it's not going to be perfect overnight. But Last season, it was, you know, all of these players that were, and I mentioned earlier the Washington Spirit players being interviewed in that E60, you know, Alex Morgan. It's not like this was just happening on the periphery of the league and that the names the highest profile players in this league didn't know about it, didn't care about it. It's the opposite. And it weighs on them. So that is going to be the story unless there is no story there, which is the goal. Does that actually happen? Because it was, these coaches are being suspended while investigations go on. Here's the Yates report. You can, E60, all of it. Does that change? What is the story of this season? Because the story of last season had very little to do with the Portland Thorns winning the NWSL championship. And that is incredibly unfortunate because the story should be about what the Thorns did, what the Thorns overcame, and the incredibly exciting core that team has moving forward. It should be about the emergence of Sophia Smith, all of that. Do we get to have that conversation this season? I really, really hope we do. I'm optimistic we do because progress is happening. Progress is also slow. There's just no way to talk about storylines, to talk about this league without acknowledging what happened last season and the systemic issues that are still there that the people in positions of power are trying to address, trying to fix. We're just not going to know for a little while at least how much change has occurred, what the impact of all of this has been, but hopefully we get to talk about what is happening on the field, and that is where the focus is because this league is special. I mean, just go look at the players on these teams who I didn't even have making the playoffs. Go look at the standings last season, how tight everything was. You don't get this on the men's side. It's one of the things that just draws me to the NWSL and draws me to the WNBA. Because you can just take pretty much any two teams in the league. They're playing each other. You're watching, and you're going, "Oh my goodness! Look at we got Christen Press going up against Trinity Rodman in the Washington Spirit." And nobody's talking about either of those teams as the best in the league. Or, you get your high-profile San Diego Wave OL Reign matchup with all the players in that game, whatever it might be. The talent is so condensed because there just aren't teams. There aren't enough teams, and so you get the best of the best every single week, no matter what the matchups are. Really excited for this NWSL season to get underway. So those are the storylines I am looking at.